Summary of 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Introduction. Fresh off the rear of the success of Sapiens and Homo Deus, Professor Yuval Noah Harari has returned with another book, almost for the ages, except for the 21st century. 21 Lessons for the 21st Century cuts through the knowledge overwhelm and muddy waters of the web world and confronts the foremost urgent questions on today's global agenda. I was excited once I received my copy of the book within the mail, courtesy of Penguin Books, and couldn't wait to urge my head buried in it. And by all accounts, i.e. mine, it didn't fail to disappoint. Lesson number 1: Disillusionment. On the subject of data overwhelm, Harari makes the purpose that humans think in stories instead of in facts, numbers, or equations, which is why the communist, fascist, and liberal stories of the 20th century were so powerful. The simpler the story, he says, the higher. A lesson not just for those of you declaring political war, which is fair to mention few of your, but also for those of you within the business and entrepreneurship game. It's imperative that you simply make your story simple. While the 20th century was all about three political systems, the 21st century introduces new stories and classes, that of humans, superhumans, and AI. Artificial intelligence. As AI gets more sophisticated, it'll create classes of humans, superhumans, who are augmented by technology. As Elon Musk acknowledged on a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, we've already been augmented, there's just a disconnect, and therefore the rate is just too slow. While there's tons of pushback against the liberal story today, Harari says that at the top of the day humankind won't abandon the liberal story, because it doesn't have any viable alternatives. People may give the system an angry kick within the stomach, but having nowhere else to travel, they're going to eventually come. Lesson number 2: Ignorance. On free will, behavioral economists and evolutionary psychologists have demonstrated that the majority human decisions are supported emotional reactions and heuristics shortcuts instead of on rational analysis, which, while out emotions and heuristics were perhaps suitable for handling life within the Stone Age, they're woefully inadequate within the Silicon Age. No individual knows everything it takes to create a cathedral, an atomic bomb, or an aircraft. What gave Homo sapiens a foothold over other animals wasn't rationality, but our unparalleled ability to think together in large groups. Individual humans know embarrassingly little about the planet, and as history progressed, we came to understand less and fewer. We believe the expertise of others for nearly all our needs. This is what Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach ask as the knowledge illusion. The reason we expect we all know tons, albeit individually we all know little or no, is because we treat knowledge within the minds of others as if it were our own. If you'll not afford to waste time, you'll never find the reality. Most political figures and business moguls are forever on the run. Yet if you would like to travel deeply into any subject, you would like tons of your time, and especially you would like the privilege of dalliance to experiment with unproductive paths, to explore dead ends, to form space for doubts and tedium, to permit little seeds of insight to slowly grow and blossom. Fake news. When 1,000 people believe some made-up story for 1 month, that's fake news. When 1 billion people believe it for 1,000 years, that's religion, and that we are admonished to not call it fake news so as to not hurt the emotions, but the faithful. For better or worse, Harari says, fiction is among the foremost effective tools in humanity's toolkit. By bringing people together, religious creeds make large-scale human cooperation possible. Stories in business. Besides religions and ideologies, commercial firms believe fiction and faux news too. Branding often involves retelling an equivalent fictional story again and again till people become convinced it's the reality. Once I say Coca-Cola, you almost certainly consider children enjoying it, playing sports, and having fun. You almost certainly don't believe overweight diabetes patients lying in hospital beds. Harari goes on to mention that while we certainly need good science, from a political perspective, an honest fantasy movie is worth much more than a piece of writing in science or nature. Lesson number 3: Fantasy. In the early 21st century, perhaps the foremost important artistic genre is fantasy, because only a few people read the newest articles within the field of machine learning or gene splicing, but instead movies like The Matrix and television series like Westworld and Black Mirror shape how people understand technology and its social and economic impacts. This also means fantasy must be much more responsible within the way it depicts scientific realities, otherwise it'd give people with the incorrect ideas or focus their attention on the incorrect problems. Perhaps the worst failing of present-day fantasy is that it attempts to confuse intelligence with consciousness. As a result, it's overly concerned a few potential war between robots and humans when actually we'd like to feel a conflict between a little superhuman elite. In brooding about the longer term of AI, Harari says, Marx remains a far better guide than Spielberg. Lesson number 4: Education. Much of what kids learn today will likely be irrelevant by 2050, which echoes many of my very own teachings as a part of the Lemonade Stand Children's Entrepreneurship Program that we've been running for nearly 3 years now. I've always maintained, during this point, that what kids actually need to find out is adaptability, learning the way to learn, resilience, curiosity, critical thinking, problem solving, and effective collaboration. However, we'll learn what Harari and pedagogical experts think shortly. Harari said that the last item an educator must give her pupils today is more information, for they have already got far an excessive amount of it. Instead, people need the power to form sense of data, to inform the difference between what's important and what's crucial, and in particular to mix many bits of data into a broad picture of the planet. Many pedagogical experts, Harari says, argue that schools should switch to teaching the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, echoing my earlier sentiments. More broadly, schools should downplay technical skills and emphasize general-purpose life skills. Most vital of all are going to be the power to effect change, to find out new things, and to preserve your mental soundness in unfamiliar situations. Again, learning the way to learn, resilience, and adaptableness. If somebody describes to you the planet of the mid-21st century, and it seems like fantasy, it's probably false, but if somebody describes to you the planet of the mid-21st century, and it doesn't sound like fantasy, it's certainly false, says Harari. On adapting to vary, after a particular age, Harari says, most of the people just don't wish to change. Once you are 15, your entire life is change. By the time you're 50, you don't want to vary, and most of the people have given abreast of conquering the planet. You favor stability. You've got invested such a lot in your skills, your career, your identity, and your worldview that you simply don't want to start out everywhere again. The harder you've worked on building something, the harder it's to abandoning of it and make space for something new. This shows up in most established organizations today, with entrenched ways of doing things and senior decision makers who are unwavering in their desire to take care of the established order. In light of this, the simplest advice Harari has for today's 15-year-olds isn't to believe the adults an excessive amount of. Most of them mean well, but they only don't understand the planet. To run fast, don't take much luggage with you, and leave all of your illusions behind, they're very heavy. Turtles all the way down. There is a story of a person who claimed that the planet is kept in situ by resting on the rear of an enormous elephant. When asked what the elephant stands on, he replied that I stand on the rear of an outsized turtle. And therefore the turtle? On the rear of a good bigger turtle. Which bigger total? The person snapped and said, don't bother about it, from there onwards it's turtles all the way down. Going back to the introductory gambit on stories, the foremost successful stories, Harari says, are open-ended. Most stories are held together by the load of the roof instead of by the strength of the foundations. In history, the roof is usually more important than the foundations. Make people believe your story. If you would like to form people really believe some fiction enticed them to form a sacrifice on its behalf. Why does one think women ask their lovers to bring them diamond rings, asks Harari. Once a devotee makes such an enormous financial sacrifice, he must convince himself that it had been for a worthy cause. This is often in line with rationalizing and normalizing our decisions, and what Barry Schwartz calls satisficing. When you inflict suffering on yourself within the name of some story, it gives you a choice: either the story is true or I'm a gullible fool. Once you inflict suffering on others, you're also given a choice: either the story is true or I'm a cruel villain. And even as we don't want to admit we are fools, we also don't want to admit we are villains, so we like better to believe that the story is true. One more thing on discretion. Just consider subsequent thought that pops in your mind. Where did it come from? Did you actually prefer to think it, and only then did you think that it? Never. Realizing this will help us subside obsessive about our opinions, feelings, and desires. Humans usually give such a lot importance to their desires that they struggle to regulate and shape the whole world consistent with these desires. It's better to know ourselves, our minds and our desires, instead of attempt to realize whatever fantasy pops up in our heads. Lesson number 5: Work. Harari says that the higher we understand the biochemical mechanisms that underpin human emotions, desires and choices, the higher computers can get at analyzing human behavior, predicting human decisions and replacing human professions like bankers and lawyers. At least in some lines of labor, it'd add up to exchange all humans with computers, albeit individually some humans still do a far better job than machines. On automation. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimated that in 2012, 31% of fatal crashes involved alcoholic abuse, 30% speeding, and 20% distracted drivers. Self-driving vehicles have none of those flaws, and eventually, we could see the displacement of 3.5 million professional truck drivers within the US alone, amongst other driving professions. Rather than replacing humans entirely, though, AI might actually help create new human jobs. Rather than humans competing with AI, they might specialize in servicing and leveraging AI. The work market of 2050 is probably going to be characterized by human-AI cooperation instead of competition. Several years after IBM's Deep Blue defeated chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov, human-computer cooperation flourished. However, in recent years, computers became so good at playing chess that their human collaborators lost their value, which might be seen as a precursor to what might happen at a more pervasive level. Another computer virus, DeepMind's AlphaZero, went from utter ignorance to creative mastery in under 4 hours without the assistance of any human guide, to dominate the world's best AlphaGo players and programs. AI and creativity. People often say that AI could never desire a person's being, that it could never be as creative as a person's being. Now, chess tournament judges are constantly on the lookout for players secretly getting help from computers. One among the ways to catch cheats, we're told, is to watch the extent of originality players display. If they play exceptionally creative moves, the judges suspect that this cannot possibly be a person's move, it must be a computer move. A minimum of in chess, creativity is already the trademark of computers instead of humans. Alternatives to UBI. The government could subsidize Universal Basic Services, UBS, instead of income. Rather than giving money to people that then go searching for whatever they need, the government might subsidize free education, free healthcare, free transport, then forth. This effectively brings the communist decide to fruition, albeit not by revolution. Harari warns of the threat of further geographic consolidation of wealth, though. If a 3D printer takes over from the Bangladeshis, the revenues previously earned by the South Asian country will now fill the coffers of a couple of tech giants in California. This might pave the way for a greater wealth gap and therefore the collapse of developing countries. Some say that the large tech companies should be taxed to hide the shortfall, and right they'll be, insofar, because the local distribution of taxes cares, but Harari points out that folks are unlikely to support the distribution of those funds offshore to places defined by President Trump as shithole countries. If you think the standard American voter will support that, says Harari, you would possibly even as well believe that Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny will solve the matter. Happiness equals reality expectations. The problem with UBI or UBS is that citizenry aren't just built for satisfaction. Human happiness depends less on objective conditions and more on our own expectations. Our expectations adapt to changing conditions, including to the condition of people, keeping up with the Joneses. When things improve, expectations balloon, and consequently even dramatic improvements in conditions might leave us as dissatisfied as before. Today's poor live better than yesterday's kings. However, Americans are taking antidepressants in astounding numbers, resulting in the present opioid epidemic. People needn't only the fundamentals, but they need to desire they have enough, that their contributions are worthwhile, that they're learning and growing, which they need access to a community. Social media. It is fascinating and terrifying to behold people that spent countless hours constructing and enhancing an ideal self online, becoming attached to their creation, and mistaking it for the reality about themselves. If you'll only feel what the people within the photos felt while taking them. Hence, if you actually want to know yourself, Harari says, you ought to not identify together with your Facebook or Instagram account. The Buddha and therefore the universe. The Buddha taught that the three basic realities of the universe. 1. Everything is consistently changing. 2. Nothing has any enduring essence, and 3. Nothing is totally satisfied. Suffering emerges because people fail to understand this. You'll explore the furthest reaches of the galaxy, but you'll never encounter something that doesn't change, that has endless essence, which completely satisfies you. According to Buddha, life has no meaning and other people don't got to create any meaning. Lesson number 6: Meditation. Harari echoes what philosophers are saying for millennia, that the deepest source of suffering is within the patterns of our own minds. Once I want something and it doesn't happen, my mind reacts by generating suffering. Suffering isn't an objective condition within the outside.
Did you like this audiobook summary? Click the like button now to support our channel, and click subscribe if you want to get notified each time we post a new free audiobook summary on YouTube.